Hello, everyone, and welcome to the February episode of 365 Explained.
Technically the second episode for February because I was rubbish, but we'll
Yeah,
we'll gloss over that and pretend no one knows.
we're doing better than last year. We're doing better than
We
last
are.
year. Yeah. Today, we're going to be talking around Copilot Frontier, and Ben's going to be explaining exactly what it is, and we'll be taking a deeper dive into Frontier and how it can help you and your organization. So,
I love how you're being clear about this and you're saying it like there is a definitive understanding and a defined definition of what Copilot Frontier is. And I imagine as we talk through this, it will become abundantly clear that there is not one thing that this is,
yeah,
and no one knows exactly what it means.
yeah.
Even anyone at Microsoft, I would suspect.
Well, you have the best understanding of anybody that I've met thus far, so you're probably the best person to talk about this.
Don't get out much though, do you? So let's be fair.
True, true. Well, maybe that's a good place to start then. Let's give a quick introduction to what is Frontier.
Sure. So Frontier is a word that Microsoft started using maybe a year or so ago publicly. I don't have my sources lined up to give an exact answer on that, but it was a word that started being thrown around in marketing material around having frontier companies, and I think the intention of this started as something as I understand, as I believe the Frontier program for Copilot will have started as a behind closed doors thing for Microsoft to have as a preview program for organizations that wanted to be at the front of the curve, the bleeding edge, whatever, phraseology you would like for using Copilot or M365 Copilot. And we started seeing that bleed out into marketing materials. So Microsoft had some literature around organizations that were kind of new, lean, forward thinking.
Yeah,
They were frontier companies, organizations. And then we started seeing frontier referenced inside. I think the research agent was one of the first product things that had this researcher brackets frontier monkeyer applied to it. And we started seeing more and more stuff under this frontier banner. Now, my summation of what it is that it is a preview program for all things Copilot, but we have different preview programs across different elements of the Microsoft stack. This is separate from those. So that's a 2-minute version of what Frontier is. Does that make sense?
yeah,
Kind of.
it definitely does make sense. But you kind of one of the first things that I thought when we first started, properly looking into Frontier, or I did, was did we need a separate channel? Did Microsoft need something separate? Like, we've got targeted release, that sort of things already for other M365 products.
Yeah.
Do you think we needed something else?
Yeah, you're right. We have what used to be Insider, didn't we? We had Windows Insider and Office Insider, but now we have channels. So you have targeted release channel, you have the preview program. I suspect what happened here, and you have TAP,
Yeah.
right? Like back in the day, TAP was the big formal program, what is it, the technology adoption program or something like that. It's the organizations are under NDA, they get early builds to on-prem versions of servers, and in Teams, we've both been involved in the Teams TAP. That was placed on an earlier ring where updates publish into rings and then push out to the kind of broadest public ring on the outside. So you got early access to stuff, but those are fairly formally defined, structured programs. I think, as I understand and what I can imagine, is that Copilot is moving at such a rate of knots that you needed, or Microsoft wanted, a better way to have stuff available to companies and users that wanted it quicker, but still have some form of structure and stuff over there. We've seen this elsewhere with Google, and there was this trend 5 years or so ago that stuff would be released publicly in beta, right? And then it would just sit in beta until it either got canned or it got released at some future point. I think this is a naming convention to signify that stuff that is on Frontier is subject to change, is not in final shape, may or may not have licensing. So do we need it? Yes and no. It doesn't quite fit under the structured preview programs that Microsoft has out there, because even if you look on the M365 roadmap, stuff that is flagged as being available in preview, so Teams has had quite a lot of stuff come out in preview. That is generally a slightly more structured way of doing it, and it is a slightly slower process, whereas I suppose Frontier is, it's this Wild West style metaphor, isn't it? That you're on the edge, constantly moving, may or may not work, may be okay, may not be okay. So I think, Frontier is a badly publicized, misunderstood mechanism for having super fast, iterative preview versions of Copilot features. So is it needed? No. Is it helpful? Yes.
Yeah.
So is it ultimately probably.
Fair. I think that's the key thing, because we are, and I think we have seen a massive increase of features come with Copilot, and they, like you said, they are coming thick and fast. This is not a you look at some kind of roadmap and you're going to get some new Copilot features in the next 9 months. They're coming very, very quickly.
Yeah.
I think maybe it is helpful, but so we kind of talked about what it is. We know a little bit what the Frontier program is. How do people get onto it? How do we get our foot in the door? How do we have a go?
Yeah, so again, this is slightly misunderstood, because I've had various discussions with internal Microsoft people, and it's more clear now. So now the requirement is that you have an M365 Copilot license. You are then, according to the wording of the Microsoft documentation, eligible for Frontier. I believe when this was first created and conceived, and probably up until maybe 6 months ago from the time of recording in Feb 2026 now, that you had to be internally nominated through some process to have your tenant placed in the Frontier program. And that would set whatever feature flags to make stuff available to your users in your tenant, available early doors. So I think that is where some of the early initial confusion of this was, that you had to be nominated and flagged as a specific Frontier organization, company, tenant, whereas now it is just, if you have M365 Copilot in your environment, you can, subject to other conditions, have Frontier functionality available to your environment and your users. And that's also a weird distinction, right? That it is, some stuff is tenant level and some stuff is user level functionality as well. It depends what the particular feature that we're dealing with here might be. And again, I suppose we've seen that in the past with Teams and similar stuff, but it is to more of a degree applying with Copilot.
Fair enough. Yeah. So, I mean, what's in Frontier right now? We're talking about Frontier. Like, what if I am eligible and it's in my tenant and I can start sharing it with tenant wide or with particular users? Like, what can I give them? What's the new stuff that's coming for Copilot?
Yeah, well, and this is one of the challenges, that it is going to be changing, week by week, certainly month by month. Although we had Ignite the back end of last year, that was, when there was a big influx of new functionality, not all of it branded as Frontier. And I should be clear as well, this is one of the challenges for users, is you don't have a nice release cycle of Microsoft develops feature goes into Frontier, then it goes into public release. It depends entirely on the type of feature that it is. So in the M365 control panel, if I look, we now have 2 down the left rail items, one for specifically Copilot. Like, that's how important this stuff is for Microsoft at the moment, that we have a dedicated Copilot menu tab, and we have a specific one for agents, and that is the M365 agent control plane, where we can deal with all of the different agents that users have created and are trying to access in our environment. But if we expand under Copilot and look in settings, it's also worth interesting. I don't know if this is on purpose, but in that left menu rail in M365, the only 2 with color on their icons
Oh,
are
interesting.
Copilot and Agent. They're the new ones. Everything else is wireframe outline icons. But if you go under Copilot and then settings, we have kind of 4 tabs for different areas we can access. And again, kind of confusingly, we have down at the bottom one labeled Microsoft Copilot. If we click on that, we get a flyout from the right that then has its own 3 subsets of, do we want to turn on Frontier in the web apps, in the desktop and mobile, or in agents? So you would, this isn't quite answering your question of what is available in Frontier, but this is kind of the master switch. Or is it the master switch? Because it still depends on the kind of feature that you're looking at. In terms of what's in it at the moment, I think the split is that we mostly see Frontier stuff as agents, because there's a lot of efforts being put into agents. If we swap over into the agents control view and go look at all agents, and if I just do a quick search for Frontier, you will see that there's a whole bunch of stuff that is in here. And now, even interestingly, I've done a search for Frontier, and one of the agents in here, called the Frontline Agent, is tagged as Preview. It's not tagged as Frontier, whereas the other stuff is tagged as Frontier. We have Sales Development, brackets Frontier,
Yeah.
Learning, brackets Frontier, Workflows, Frontier. So what is covered under Frontier? Most of it is advanced, deeper agents. So things like I said, Researcher and Analyst were the 2 first agents that were available. Researcher is the thing that will do a pass through content and then loop through. So it will go, get information from sources, read the sources, see if it needs to understand, get more data. It was that iterative, deep thinking model. That was a Frontier feature initially. Workflow and App Builder. Workflow is able to create you Power Automate interfaces through Copilot only. The downside is it's not a true Power Automate, as in you can't then see it as a flow in your Power Automate environment. It lives in a separate little ring-fenced Power Platform environment inside your tenant that only admins can interact with or deal with. You can use it, you can build stuff, but you can go in and access it. App Builder is similar. That's a low code, no code, very much no code if you're dealing through the App Builder interface, that you just tell it what you want it to make and it goes and tries to make it. You've got like the skills agent and the people agent. They're designed to surface information from inside the organization. So it's a whole mishmash of things. And if we go back and look in the Copilot settings, I don't know if you spotted it, there was one in there called Opal, that is brackets Frontier. Opal is the computer use agent. So that is where it will spin up. You ask the agent Copilot to do something, it will go and spin up a cloud PC, effectively run a web browser. The Copilot is able to interact inside the web browser on your behalf. So you could ask it to do something and it will then go click around on different screens of whatever web app you're trying to interact with and do things as you. That is something where there is very specifically a requirement for guardrails, right? Because App Builder, what's the worst that might happen? It's going to build an app that isn't able to function. People search is going to give you results that aren't quite the people that you're looking for in a not Star Wars fashion. Whereas Opal, potentially that is not taking interactions for you in the real world, but it's certainly in a web browser. And, there's all sorts of considerations and permissions and guardrails that you need to think about around that. Now, Microsoft has the onus for how does it safely handle, you need to log into a website. How does it pass the credentials from you, the user, into the Opal, browser session in a secure way? But then what if it's clicking on a button to delete a whole bunch of machines out of your RMM solution, or, do something along those lines? There needs to be a way of like, are you sure? Is this okay? So some of the Frontier features and functionality, you're probably okay opening it up to the whole organization, whereas some of it needs to be a little bit more defined, specified, controlled.
Yeah, I mean, from an admin point of view, what I'm seeing right now is potentially Frontier is not something you come in, turn it on, and then just forget about it. You may have to come inside of here, actually look at, what's coming. Do I want specific users to only have access to this? Is it a whole tenant thing? So there's a little bit more from an admin point of view to Frontier.
Yeah, and as much as we love to bang on Microsoft and ding them for how they approach administrative stuff, at least there are
Mm,
some layers of controls. They're not necessarily the nice layers of controls that we would expect. For example, what happens if I go into the Opal and I have in my Opal on screen here, you can see I've specified I can have no users can access it or only specified groups can access it. But what happens if I've then got Copilot Frontier through the web apps is no access, but my Opal is some access? There's weird, is Opal a separate Frontier thing or is it a subset of the broader Copilot Frontier program? We don't know. And you're right, as an admin, it's nice that we have some element of control here, but actually there's a broader challenge of you need to be just checking this semi-regularly, like twice a month, maybe come in and just check that the Copilot Frontier config and functionality that you think you have enabled for your users is enabled for your users or your groups. Have you noticed another interesting thing there?
yeah. The groups thing. I mean, it seems like on this that you've got on screen now for turning on those Frontier features, it's all users or specific users. You
Yeah.
can't seem to also do groups. So in some places you can do groups, in some places you can't. That's
Yeah, exactly. So Opal was specifying
which
groups,
will be an
but Copilot
M365 group,
Frontier
right?
was an M365 group,
Yeah.
whereas the Frontier web apps is either none, all users, or specific users. You did used to be able to pick groups in here, but now you can only specify named individuals. So again, from a business as part of how do you handle this from an adoption point of view, I would like to have had this as groups because then you can have your Copilot champions group, your advanced users group,
Yep.
your whatever, and you know that by putting people in those groups, they've got access to it. I suspect the Microsoft reasoning behind the scenes is that if your organization is set up for Frontier and you have a user mindset of these things are in preview, maybe may work, may not work, that stuff like the web apps, yeah, fine, let's just have all users in the org can have Frontier, and you brief people that if it's got a Frontier Monkia in the name, that it's maybe not so good. And then at least Opal, which is maybe more of a considered thing, you do need to lock that down. But I do find the disparate kind of design here of some users, some groups. I don't know. And the other thing in the Frontier features, that is just web apps, right? So that is using agents inside a web app. And then we have the desktop and mobile apps. It's telling us in the UI here that we need to maybe also change the channel. So we're talking about, that again, if you read the Microsoft documentation, it says that Copilot Frontier doesn't have any specific software requirements. It's like, well, but actually to use it inside, if there's a new feature that only works in a certain version of Office, you do need to be on that certain version of Office. So you maybe need to have preview features, channel stuff enabled in Office. And again, that might be through your software deployment in Tune or whatever else you're using, that you have specific groups of users that are allocated to specific, bits of functionality, but then you can't use those groups in here. So it's this weird, web apps is functionality in Copilot when you're interacting through, the specific app. Desktop is if you're using it inside Office. And then agents, it's telling you actually that is controlled through the agent store. So even back in our agent store, when we search for Frontier, we can have specific groups of users who have access to the frontline agent. And that can be no users, or specific users or groups. We're back on
All
groups.
Yeah.
So fun and games is, from an admin, be aware that you are having to control this across multiple different planes, depending on what you want out for your users.
Yeah. I mean, we've touched this a couple of times now during this little chat, but how is Frontier comparing to those other preview programs like targeted release, Office Windows sort of scenario?
It is moving. It's moving faster in that the Office and Windows have a very defined cadence of a release cycle, so you know where you stand. So you know that Windows has 26H1, 26H2, although 26H1 weirdly will only be for ARM-based processors. It's not going to be for x86 processors or whatever. But that there's this cadence of releases. You know where you are. You know that you're on a long-term servicing branch, or you're on a delayed release, so that you know where you're at. With Frontier, it's that Wild West approach again, isn't it? You don't quite know when something is going to pop up in Frontier. You don't know when something is going to pop out of Frontier. And we've got a similar thing that we saw with Teams and Teams Preview, that you would have stuff, and some people get quite upset at this, that it's a bit of a bait and switch, which I think it is. It's not intentionally done that way, but you have functionality that will appear as a public preview, and then it goes behind Teams Premium as a paid for thing. We don't know with the Copilot functionality, if stuff is in the Frontier program, licensing might not have been devised and developed. And I don't think it's a deliberate malicious thing by Microsoft to try and get users used to using something and then take it away and you now need to pay for it. I think it's purely the way their dev cycle works, is the technical teams wants to get something in the hands of users so it can be pounded on, tested, made sure it's working the way they need, they can tweak it, they can update it. And then it goes through whatever team it is that decides how it's licensed, how it's paid for, how it's monetized. And that can be where you have a conflict of something was in preview and then is taken away or hidden. So that is another consideration with this Frontier stuff from an admin giving it to your users' point of view, that it may roll under the M365 Copilot license. We currently don't have an M365 Copilot Plus license, but we all know how this stuff goes over the years, right? So that's another consideration. So specifically, how is it different to those other programs? It's more freeform and laissez-faire, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting, the licensing front, because I think, like you said, it's Microsoft trying to do a good thing and get features into hands of users as soon as possible. But there's that, it could be seen quite nefarious on the back end to, we're going to give it you and then charge you, another time, kind of get you hooked and then take it away from you.
Well, and there's another thing I've got on screen here, which is, again, under the agents and then tools. We have a list of MCP servers, which are Frontier tagged. So they've got that brackets Frontier on them. So an MCP server is Model Context Protocol. That is a machine interface for an AI solution to use. But where's that controlled under Frontier? Which of those screens that we looked at on the previous one, is this a web app thing? Is that it's not an agent thing, although it's listed under agents? But if we look at it, we don't actually have any controls for being able to interface with this. So this is another oddity. If I needed to block MCP use for my users, how would I do that? Because that could be that an MCP server is designed for AI tools to be able to interact with whatever this is. So Claude supports MCP servers. Could I go into Claude and copy and paste that URL for my MCP server, then authenticate with it? Where do I block? But I don't want Claude to be able to access it, or that I don't want this specific user to be able to access it. And I'm asking rhetorical questions very much because I don't have an answer at the time of recording, because I haven't dug into it. But that's a whole nother, layer of things to think about here.
Yeah, and I think when you see things move as quick as we have been seeing, with Copilot and AI in general, holes like this will show up more often because, just not getting thought about, or trying to get stuff into people's hands to be able to use. Sometimes the more security or how can we block this from a tenant level stuff may fall by the wayside a little bit, but it's interesting on the front for sure.
It is, and I'm really interested to see what like an official Microsoft MCP for Teams, for Outlook, for SharePoint, what that's going to let you do versus some of the community stuff that's available out there. Like I was talking to you just pre us recording that I use OneNote very heavily, and I'm wondering from a personal productivity, not a corporate one, whether OneNote is the right tool for me. And there are a number of third-party MCP servers that have been developed that I like the idea of how I've got various chats with AI of what my personal productivity methodology should look like around
Mhm.
how I handle to-do lists, how I handle categories versus projects versus whatever. And I would love to be able to hook in an MCP server for OneNote to then help me go and tidy up my back catalog archive of stuff that's been dumped in there over the years and years and years. And it's like, well, would I use a Frontier Microsoft MCP? Would I use a third party? Like there's such a lot of cool stuff that you could be able to do with this over time.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah. Well, let's maybe start to wrap it up here. Maybe just a quick, should you turn this on? Do you think, Ben? Do you think people should go in and just start enabling Frontier for people? Should we be a little bit hesitant, maybe wait a little bit and see if anything else comes out around, management of it, or should we just go for it?
Yeah, we can dig really deep into that. It depends.
Ah, yeah, the consulting answer.
Um, without leaning on it depends too heavily, it depends, right? It is all about, this is at least the plus side of this is tagged as Frontier, right? We know that with Frontier stuff, we are dealing with things that are not fully formed, not fully understood, not finalized. And it's all about risk versus reward. It is supposed to be that you have a higher amount of risk in that they may not function the right way, but the reward is that they may help you get work done, get stuff done better, faster, whatever, more creatively, however you want to phrase that. So if you are a big corporate organization where you have a lot of rigid structure and a lot of rigid process, Frontier is something you would turn off by default, I would expect. Although things like Frontier agents, maybe that is something you would consider having on because there are lower risks of, data going somewhere or, if you are a small organization where you have a higher capacity for accepting the risk of this sort of stuff, maybe you would turn it on by default for everybody. But the second layer of that is it depends on your users. It depends on how fluid, flexible, adaptable your users are to being able to try new things, to understand new stuff. If you have done a nice structured Copilot deployment program and you have weekly tips emails and a discussion forum and all that sort of stuff, turning on Frontier for those users and explaining to them, hey, this is an even squishier version of Copilot features you may find benefit in. They're there if you want to use them, but they may not work right. And we'd love your feedback and your information about it. Turn it on. If you've not done a big Copilot deployment, if you've rolled out a bunch of licenses and you're struggling with adoption and you're not seeing people using it and they're all saying it doesn't do what they need and it's rubbish and it doesn't work right, should you turn on Frontier? Probably not, because then they might do something that still won't work right or is extra, especially not what you wanted to do. But then actually, maybe there's something in Frontier that solves all their problems by miraculously reading their mind and giving them the kind of answers that they don't need. There is no right and wrong answer here. It does depend. It's about balancing the risk of those things. And only, you as an admin have a view on your organization. In my personal tenants, have all of the Frontier stuff on because I want to live on that cutting edge stuff. I want to understand it. I want to play with it. I want to break it. And I do see some of that stuff trickling through into my work tenant as well, which, all of that depends on where the tenant is in the world and what rings and stuff. But some of that Frontier stuff I find properly useful. Like Researcher was amazing. Analyst has been really helpful. I want to play more with the Opal computer use stuff, but I totally understand that I probably won't see that in a more structured tenant for a little while because there's a lot more stuff to think about. But that's back to what's Microsoft doing as a default?
Yeah.
Am I going to see it because it suddenly pops in by mistake? So again, just make sure you're checking this stuff out semi-regularly, coming in, clicking around, looking on the roadmap for stuff that is tagged as Frontier and seeing where that comes out.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really great discussion that we've just had around Frontier and, how you can get involved, how you can get it turned on or turned off. It depends on your organization. But Yeah, I think unless there's anything specific else you want to say around Frontier, Ben, well,
No, I don't think so. I'll pop some resources in which sort of show, there's some Microsoft Copilot Frontier becoming available. There's a PDF that has some information. There's a shameless self-promotion of my blog that has a TLDR summary that I've tried to pull together about what it is and how it works and where it lives. And it's frustrating because even us talking about this for the last 30 minutes, I don't feel like I've clarified anything other than sort of explaining it's complicated. But this is one of those things that, this is you and me talking about this. We're putting it out there for the bigger world. I would love to hear from somebody out there around, does this actually make any more sense now that you've heard this? Is this something that you had heard and misunderstood or not understood? Like, what are you doing in your environments to handle this stuff? Because it's all very well us pontificating about it, but I want to keep this, grounded, for want of a better word, through real world. So please, like, hit us up on LinkedIn or wherever you heard this from, and tell us what you make of Frontier.
100%, yeah. Well, thanks for your time, Ben, and talking us through that. I think next month, March's episode, we're going to be talking around, again, it'll be yourself talking around, when do you expect things to show up in your tenant? These features and flags, and there's plenty of different release schedules and stuff that are around Microsoft. So we're going to spend a little bit of time explaining that. And
so the M365 update life cycle.
Yeah, it's a good.
That sounds
way
grand.
to put it. Yeah. But yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe and leave comments in the section below if you want to see or hear us talk about anything specific. Or
just the little thumbs button will be fine.
Yeah,
I'm happy with the thumbs button.
That'd be great. Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Cheers.
All right, thanks, Zach.
Bye.